Hey Java developers, welcome to the Inside Java Newscast. Java 20 has just been released and we'll be covering everything, yes, everything that has been released in Java 20. As you might have noticed, this is going to be a somewhat longer episode of the Inside Java Newscast if you saw the runtime of this video. Now, and that's because, well, despite us releasing a new version of Java every 6 months, a lot can change. However, so this video isn't hours long, I will really only be summarizing most of these issues. Still, I did include the release notes in the description of this video. And I will also be including the JBS or JEP ID in one of the corners of this video, so that way if you are interested in learning more about that particular issue, you have an easy way of looking up more information about it. With that said, let's dive right in. Alright, let's cover the biggest changes first. The JEPs are JDK enhancement proposals, of which there are 7 included in the Java 20 release. We'll cover that bit of confusion between 6 or 7 a little bit later. So, easily the headline among of the JEPs is JEP 429, which introduces scoped values as an incubator feature. Scope values are a way of sharing immutable data within and across threads, particularly key when working with a large number of virtual threads. It seeks to improve upon some of the shortcomings of thread local, which would have been particularly noticeable within the context of virtual threads. There is, of course, a lot more to scope values. Luckily, my colleague Jose has already covered scope values in a JEP Cafe, which you can watch here. The other two Project Loom JEPs, 436 for virtual threads and 437 for structured concurrency, only contain minor changes. JEP 436 had a small number of API changes proposed in JEP 425, which was part of Java 19, made permanent as they were broadly useful independent of virtual threads. The only change introduced in JEP 437 was to support the inheritance of scope value by threads created in a task scope, something again covered in Jose's episode on scope values. Project Amber had 2 JEPs included in Java 20. JEP 432 is the second iteration of record patterns as a preview feature, which included 3 changes. The first is that the compiler will now infer the type of generic record patterns, like seen in this example. The second is record patterns can now be included in the header of for loops, like seen in this example. And finally, the removal of support for named record patterns, like in this example. Ultimately, for named record patterns, it was seen that there was little use for this feature, so support for it was dropped. JEP 433 pattern matching for switch is getting a 4th preview and includes 2 changes. The first is that now, instead of incompatible class change error being thrown when there's no match found on an exhausted switch, it will be a match exception. The other change we largely already covered, which includes supporting type inferencing for record patterns that are included part of a switch. Now, hopefully we will see a final version of record patterns and pattern matching for switch in JDK 21. Lastly, we have Project Panama. JEP 434, the second preview of the foreign function and memory API, is having 3 small changes. The memory segment and memory address abstractions are now unified. The sealed memory layout hierarchy is enhanced to facilitate the usage with pattern matching in switch expressions and statements, and memory session has been split into arena and segment scope to facilitate sharing across maintenance boundaries. Then we have the JEP 438 for the vector API.
Panama's vector API is extremely stable at this point. So much so that there weren't any changes in JDK 20, so not even a JDK enhancement proposal was filed for it.
Silly Nikolai, and your inability to do simple things like see into the future. However, as painful as it is for me to admit it, Nikolai is half right. There are no changes to the Vector API, and therein lies the confusion around this JEP. Because the Vector API is a preview feature, it still needed to have a JEP attached to it, which became JEP 438, which was created at the end of February. A simple miscommunication is behind this late-breaking JEP and why there are 7 JEPs instead of 6 included in this release. Now let's look at the minor new features that have been added. Again, if you want to learn more about a particular feature, be sure to check out the JBS or JDK bug system ID that's in the corner over here if you want to learn more about it. Support for Unicode 15 has been added, adding 4,489 new characters to the Java Lang character, bringing its total to 149,186. Compress was added as a new command line option to JMod, which can be used to specify the compression level of a JMod archive. The G1GC added a new JMX bean, garbage collection MX bean, which reports the occurrence and duration of remark and cleanup GC pauses. 2 new JFR events have been added, JDK Initial Security Property and JDK Security Provider Service. JDK Initial Security Property records the details of security properties when loaded via the java.security class. And JDK Security Provider Service records the details of java.security provider get service. There's actually several other security changes that we'll be touching on in this episode, but if you want a more in-depth rundown of recent security changes, be sure to check out episode 42 of Inside Java Newscast by Anna, where she covers security changes in JDK 19 and JDK 20. On security issues, we have provide Poly 1305 intrinsics on x86-64 platforms with AVX 512 instructions, and provide Cha-Cha 20 intrinsics on x86-64 and AArch64 platforms.
I know some of these words.
Yes. Okay, more seriously, this is about providing optimizations for cryptographic routines, but this is honestly beyond me. So check out the relevant JBS issues for more information, or also check out Anna's Inside Java Newscast. New Java SE APIs, javax.net.ssl.ssl parameters, getName grouped, and setName groups have been added, allowing applications to customize and exchange the name groups of algorithms using individual TLS and DTLS connections. Java-C has a new lint option, lossy conversions, which can warn about typecast in compound assignments that might have lossy conversions. Java-C would throw an error on this example, but wouldn't here, but would now produce a warning with xlint lossy conversion added to Java-C. Next are the features that haven't been quite removed yet, but will be soon. That's right, deprecated features. I would recommend checking out the official JDK 20 Java docs, link in the description, going to the Deprecated tab, and limit the selection JDK 20 to see all the APIs that have been deprecated, as well as the JSR for Java 20 SE, again, link in the description. As far as what has been called out in this release, well, applet developers get no breaks, as the JMX management applet has been marked for deprecated for removal. Sorry, applet developers. Pruning the garden that is Java is a key part of good stewardship, and Java 20 is no different, with several features and options being removed. Thread.suspend, resume, and stop have been removed. Now, they are still part of the API, but calling any of these methods will result in an unsupported operation exception being thrown. The G1 garbage collector has totally refactored how they handle concurrent refinement threads, which should improve performance. However, this refactoring also means some G1 configuration arguments no longer have purpose. Currently, these options on screen will be a no-op, but they may be removed in a future release of Java. Now we move to the Other Notes section. Most of these are bug fixes or minor updates. The behavior of Java math.big decimal move point left and move point right has been restored to spec on 0 arguments. In earlier releases, they returned a result with the same unscaled value and scale, which was against the specification. With JDK 20, then these methods are invoked on a target with a negative scale, they'll return a result which is numerically the same as a target, but with a different unscaled value and scale. The default implementation of the read method on HTTP response input streams will now throw an IO exception on interrupt, which is a change from earlier releases which ignored the interruption. Additionally, if interrupted, the request will now be canceled and the input stream closed, and the thread interrupt status will be set to true. The constructors for java.net URL will now be more strict on the input they accept, which means the malformed URL exception might be thrown in areas it might have not been previously. This is done to move forward the validation of the input that would have been previously delayed until Open Connection or Connect was called. This behavior can be reverted with the JVM arguments on screen. The default keep alive time for java.net HTTP client has been reduced from 1200 seconds to 30 seconds. If you ask me or Data the Android, that is still a lifetime.
For an Android, that is nearly an eternity.
Related, you can actually set the system-wide values for the keep alive time with the new JVM arguments JDK HTTP client keep alive timeout and JDK HTTP client keep alive timeout.h2. The latter will exclusively set it for HTTP2 connections. The specification of the java.nio channels.file channel is updated to clarify that the effect of attempting to write a specific position using the file channel write method is a system dependent when the channel is open to append mode. That is, the file nio file standard open option append is passed to the file open method when the channel is opened. In particular, on some operating systems, bytes will be written at a given position, while on the other operating systems, the given position will be ignored and the bytes will be appended to the file. On Mac OS, file names are no longer normalized to Apple's variant of Unicode normalization format D. File names are normalized on HFS Plus prior to Mac OS 10.13, but on APFS on Mac 10.13 and newer, the normalization is no longer affected. The previous behavior may be enabled by setting the system property jdk.nio path use normalization form D to true. The java.text break iterator class now conforms to the extended GraphMe clusters break defined in Unicode Consortium's standard Annex number 29. This will result in noticeable behavior changes to how break iterator works, which is demonstrated in the example on screen. The old behavior was simply wrong, so there is no rollback for this change. Time zone data has been updated to 2022C. This also notably includes changes from 2022B, which consolidated regions from the timestamp data post 1970 into a single time zone database. All time zone IDs remain the same, but the merged time zones will point to the shared zone database. This might mean pre-1970 data may not be compatible with earlier JDK versions. The affected time zones are on screen. For more details, refer to the announcement of 2022B, link in the description. The identity hash map remove and replace methods have been corrected to use identity, that is, equal, instead of the method equals when comparing the value argument, which matches specifications. The JDK implementation of the LDAP provider no longer supports deserialization by default. Specifically, the com.sun JNDI LDAP object trust serial data property is now set to false by default. The scope of that property has also been extended to cover the reconstruction of RMI remote objects from Java remote location LDAP attributes. If you need the deserialization of Java objects from an LDAP context, then trust serial data must explicitly be set to true. New security properties have been added to provide more granular control over the set of JNDI object factories allowed to reconstruct Java objects from JNDI/LDAP and JNDI/RMI context. They are JDK.JNDI LDAP objects factories filters for specifying which object factory classes are allowed to instantiate Java objects from object references returned by the JNDI LDAP context. By default, only object factories defined in the Java naming module are allowed. JDK.JNDI.RMI.object factories filters for specifying which object classes are allowed to instantiate Java objects from object references returned by the JNDI RMI context. By default, only object factories defined in the JDK RMI modules are allowed. The specification for the Java debug interface method, objectReference.setValue, has changed in this release to require the given field to be non-final. This is to match the JDK implementation, which doesn't allow a final field in any scenario. The default JMEG agent now sets an open input filter on the RMI connection to restrict the types that the server will deserialize. This shouldn't have an impact in most cases, as the default filter already covers any type in the open mbeans and mxbeans might use. However, if you are using a custom mbean, then you will need to update the file comp management.properties and modify the com.sun.management.rmx serial filter.pattern property. Alternatively, this can be done through the command line via the VM argument com/sun/management remote rmx remote serial filter pattern. In JDK 17, G1 added preventative garbage collections. However, it was found after testing and feedback that this ended up adding more GC work. So this change was rolled back in JDK 20. This feature can be re-enabled with the on-screen VM arguments. For applications using a Java agent, a custom loader, and invokes instrumentation.append2systemClassLoader certs, the JVM no longer synchronizes the custom class loader. So when calling instrumentation append2systemClassLoader certs, it must be done in a thread-safe manner. The VMTI specifications for the getLocal and setLocal functions has been changed to require the target thread to be either suspended or the current thread. The error code JVMTI error thread not suspended will be returned if this requirement is not met. The full list of impacted JVMTI functions are on screen. The legacy parallel class loading, which was initially introduced as a workaround in JDK 6, is being disabled by default and has been marked for deprecation. If you see the Java lang linkage error attempt duplicate class definition error, then your code might be using this legacy workaround. This behavior can be enabled with the VM argument enable wait for parallel load, though the actual fix for this was introduced in JDK 7 with parallel capable class loaders. The class invalid parameter exception has had the constructors string throwable and throwable added to it for easier usability. The JDK will throw an internal error exception if it is unable to load the conf security Java security, though this should never happen as the default file should always be present. Prior to this change, which apparently never occurred, a static and outdated security configuration was loaded. The TLS ECDH cipher suites have been disabled by default. This is because these cipher suites do not offer forward secrecy and are rarely used in practice. Any attempts to use these suites starting with TLS ECDH will fail with an SSL handshake exceptions. Users, at their own risk, can re-enable this cipher suite by removing ECDH from the TLDS disabled algorithm security property. Similarly, DLTS 1.0 has also been disabled at default and will also fail with a SSL handshake exception when used. DLTS 1.0 can be re-enabled again at your own risk by removing the DLTS v 1.0 from the JDK TLS disabled algorithms security property. The specification of subject.current has been changed in this release to drop the expectation that the subject is inherited when creating a thread. This change is related to Project Loom. as virtual threads do not capture the calling context at thread creation time, and the access control context is not inherited. The set implementation that holds principals and credentials in a JAS subject will throw an NPE when attempting to add, query, or remove a null element. An exhaustive switch over an enum class will throw a match exception instead of an incompatible class change error if no match is found. This is related to the changes to switch introduced in JEP 433, which we covered earlier. However, this will only happen if enabled preview is used. This change is done to unify the treatment of erroneous exhaustive switches introduced by enhancing switches with pattern labels. The preview API page in the documentation generated by JavaDoc now provides detailed information about the JEPs the preview features belong to. The link plain, and C tags have now been enhanced to allow an arbitrary anchors to the JavaDoc generated documentation for an element. To distinguish these references from member references, a double hash mark is used to separate the elements from the URI fragment. JavaDoc now generates ID attributes for all HTML headings in documentation comments that might be used for link anchors. Each release usually has a few small edge case issues to be aware of. For Java 20, there are two. Java 20 introduced two methods to convert to and from the IEEE 754 binary 16 format, Java lang float to float 16 and Java lang float 16 to float. However, the JIT compiler may optimize these methods so that they don't return the same NaN value. This can be addressed by disabling JIT optimization for these methods with the VM arguments on screen. The other known issues applications can experience is when using the JDK XSLT to convert very large style sheets to Java objects, which can produce the error on screen. The fix for this would be to simply break up the XSLT style sheets into smaller templates. While we do try to make the Oracle JDK and OpenJDK binaries as similar as possible, there are a few differences. The Oracle JDK offers installers which not only place the JDK binary in your system, but also update important configurations like Java Home. Usage logging is only available in Oracle JDK. Oracle JDK requires that third-party cryptographic providers be signed with a Java Cryptographic Extension, or JCE, code signing certificate. The output of Java version is different. Oracle JDK 17 and later are released under the Oracle No-Fee Terms and Conditions license, while OpenJDK is released under GPL v2 WCP. License files included with each of these will therefore be different. Oracle JDK distributes FreeType under the FreeType license, and OpenJDK does so under GPL v2. Oracle JDK has the cup and steam icons, and OpenJDK has Duke icons. Oracle JDK source code includes Oracle proprietary confidential. Use is subject to license terms. Source code distributed with OpenJDK refers to the GPL license terms instead. Woo! And that is everything in Java 20. Please let us know if this kind of content is useful. I figured this would be a good way of sharing all that has changed in a new version of Java rather than requiring everyone to go through the release notes. If we do see a positive reception, we'll do this again in the future. But until then, happy coding! I guess it really was Java Kingdom.